That morning smelled of routine. Students hustling, hallways echoing with voices, the familiar sound of the bell signaling the end of recess. But in less than 2 hours, Lincoln High School would become the center of a national commotion. What began as a simple student fainting in front of an old locker at the end of Hall C turned into one of the most disturbing discoveries in the city's recent history. The first versions were vague. They said the boy had leaned against the closet door and fallen to the floor as if he had seen something impossible. Others swore he had screamed before losing consciousness, a stifled scream as if something had pierced him from the inside. But what really fueled the panic was what happened next. When the principal, accompanied by 2 staff members and a patrol officer, decided to open the closet. What was inside, no one could explain. Not even the professionals trained to deal with the worst. Because what was found in that forgotten space wasn't just an old object, nor any evidence. It was a piece of a puzzle that should never have been touched. A secret frozen in time, forcibly sealed by those who believed it would never be discovered. And it was precisely the innocent touch of a boy. The same boy who was always the last to be chosen in group projects, the same boy no one listened to, that made the past explode in the present like an emotional bomb. Now, with the city in shock and authorities trying to control the narrative, the question echoing around every corner is, what was in that closet? And why did this boy, this specific boy, seem to carry a weight in his eyes that no one had ever noticed before? To understand everything that was revealed in that closet and how it all began long before that day, we need to go back in time and get to know who this boy really was. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. The next Graveyard Tales are even more disturbing. His name was Ethan Johnson, 13 years old, the only child of a mother who did her best to support herself while working endless shifts at 2 jobs. He grew up in a small apartment in the East Point neighborhood, a simple place where routine was marked by the distant noise of busy streets and the heavy silence that filled the living room when his mother left early and returned late. Ethan learned from an early age to fill the void with imagination and observation. He always carried a worn notebook in his backpack where he recorded random phrases, details he noticed in people, and even sounds few noticed. At school, he wasn't exactly popular. While other kids fought over who had the newest sneakers or who scored the most points on the basketball team, Ethan went unnoticed, sitting in the back of the room, scribbling stories or observing what his classmates couldn't see. There was something in his eyes, a mix of shyness and depth, that made it seem like he always knew more than he was letting on. But what others saw was just a quiet, silent, almost invisible boy. Teachers recognized his intelligence, but also noted his difficulty expressing himself. Some said it was laziness, others believed it was simply disinterest. What no one understood was that Ethan carried within himself a rare sensitivity, the ability to connect dots that others missed. This sensitivity, however, came at a price. He became an easy target for jokes, mocking looks, and even isolation. Many called him the hallucinatory boy because he always seemed to suspect things no one else noticed. Despite this, his relationship with his mother was one of silent complicity. In the rare moments they were together, she encouraged him to never stop writing down his ideas, even when they seemed silly. "One day, Ethan, you'll understand why you see what others don't," she would say, as she hugged him before leaving for another exhausting shift. These words echoed in his mind, serving as fuel whenever he felt completely alone. At Lincoln High School, there was one detail Ethan couldn't ignore: the locker at the end of the west hallway. To others, it was nothing more than rusty iron, crooked doors, and a musty smell. To him, however, there was something different. He couldn't explain where that feeling came from, but every time he passed by it, a shiver ran down his spine, as if something were alive behind those time-worn hinges. His classmates laughed when he looked away from that spot, called him a coward, and made up stories to provoke him. But Ethan simply remained silent, not daring to reveal the strange energy he felt every time he approached that space. He didn't want to appear any weirder than they already said he was. What no one could have imagined was that this same boy, invisible to everyone's eyes, was about to become the protagonist of a revelation that would forever change the history of the school and the city. But it was on a seemingly ordinary morning, amid hurried footsteps and carefree laughter, that the first signs began to appear, signs that no one but Ethan would dare notice. The hallways of Lincoln High School had that distinctive smell of hasty cleaning mixed with old dust, something that always seemed to permeate the air. For most students, this was nothing more than routine, but for Ethan, every detail was a puzzle waiting to be deciphered. It was on one of these ordinary days that the boy noticed the first sign. As he passed through the west hallway, where almost no one usually went, he heard a metallic sound that didn't match the surroundings. It was like something scraping against the inside of an old, forgotten locker. He stopped, took a deep breath, and pressed his ear against the door. The cold iron gave off a strange sensation, as if life were hidden behind the structure. For a few seconds, he swore he heard a muffled echo, a creak that sounded more like a distant whisper. Startled, he quickly backed away, feigning normalcy as a group of students passed by, laughing. In the following days, the sensation only intensified. Every time he walked down that hallway, the closet seemed more present, almost purposefully drawing his attention. Once, as he hurried past, he felt a cold breeze escape through the cracks, something impossible in a locked closet. Another time he noticed the door shaking slightly, even without any wind. Ethan tried to observe without attracting attention, but his silence didn't go unnoticed. His classmates mocked him, making up ghost stories, calling him the voice hunter and the scare boy. He just lowered his head and followed, but deep down, he knew it wasn't his imagination. The closet hid something no one wanted to see. One night, he dreamed of that hallway. In the dream, the closet opened by itself, revealing endless darkness, and from inside, hands reached out to grab him. He woke up sweaty, his breath caught in his chest, and was certain that what he was about to discover wasn't just a figment of his overactive imagination. From that moment on, every step he took towards school seemed to lead him closer to that secret. The locker was no longer just a strange detail in an empty hallway. It was a dangerous invitation, a call that echoed within him. And even without knowing it, Ethan was already caught up in the mystery, unable to ignore what awaited him behind that rusty door. And it was just when he had the courage to get closer than ever that something unexpected happened. Something that would make his body crumble in front of everyone and reveal the first clue to a secret buried in time. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sun streamed through the large windows of Lincoln High School, reflecting off the polished hallways. The sound of conversations, hurried footsteps, and lockers opening and closing created the everyday music of any school. But for Ethan, that day was unlike any other. Since the night before, he'd felt a weight on his chest, as if he were being pushed by an invisible force to finally face what haunted him so much. As he passed through the west hallway, he felt the silent call again. The cabinet stood there, imposing in its decay, with peeling paint, rusted hinges, and marks that resembled ancient scratches. Ethan took a deep breath, looked around to make sure no one was paying attention, and reached out. The cold touch of metal coursed through his fingers like an electric shock. In a split second, the world went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor, surrounded by curious and confused faces. Classmates whispered, some laughed, others asked if he was okay. Teachers tried to lift him, but Ethan could barely comprehend what had happened. He felt weak, dazed, as if he had crossed an invisible threshold. The strangest thing was that in the instant before he lost consciousness, he felt as if the locker door had shifted slightly, revealing an impossible shadow. Hours later, now more recovered, Ethan couldn't contain himself. He returned to the hallway alone. His heart was pounding, but his curiosity overcame his fear. He approached slowly, ran his fingers along the side, and felt a barely perceptible protrusion. He pushed carefully, and to his surprise, a small section of the structure gave way, opening a narrow crack that let out a breath of thick, stifling air. With a trembling body, he leaned in to take a closer look. Within that dark crevice, there was something that made no sense. A hidden space, larger than any closet should have. He could make out dusty objects, as if someone had used that space to store something that shouldn't be seen. Ethan recoiled, his heart racing. This discovery wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. The entire school could be walking daily alongside a secret buried for years. But as he tried to process what it meant, he didn't realize that simply seeing it put him at risk. The cabinet wasn't just a forgotten piece of iron, it was the gateway to a dark past that some would do anything to keep locked away. And when Ethan tried to tell what he had seen, believing that finally someone would listen, he discovered that the truth can be crueler than the mystery, because no one was willing to believe him. The next morning, Ethan still felt the suffocating sensation of what he had seen. The secret compartment wouldn't leave his mind, and the memory of the shadow lurking behind the crack seemed to haunt him even in his dreams. Determined not to carry this alone, he resolved to seek help. He walked down the hallway toward the principal's office, each step heavier than the last, as if the entire building conspired to silence him. In the principal's office, he explained in detail what had happened. He told about fainting, the door moving, and the hidden space. The man behind the desk, however, merely arched his eyebrows, crossed his arms, and said in a dry voice, "Ethan, you probably passed out because you didn't eat breakfast. Don't make up stories. We have real students to worry about." The words cut deeper than any physical wound. The boy left with a heavy heart, but he hadn't given up yet. He then sought out his history teacher, the only one who seemed to have patience with him. He tried again to explain, describing every detail, but received only a condescending smile and a pat on the shoulder. "You have a very vivid imagination, boy. Maybe you should write a short story about it." Things got worse when he tried to confide. In two classmates, what was supposed to be a cry for help turned into a joke. They spread the story that Ethan had passed out because the ghost in the locker pulled him, and within hours, the entire school was laughing at his expense. Hallways echoed with laughter, and some even imitated his fall, theatrically falling to the ground as they passed him. The bullying grew stronger, and each mockery felt like an extra weight on his shoulders. Even the janitor, Mr. Miller, looked at him with disdain. When he heard the students' comment, he muttered something about kids who make things up too much and stared at him with cold eyes, so cold they made Ethan instinctively recoil. No one believed him. No one was willing to listen. The isolation grew, and the pain of carrying such a heavy secret alone almost made him give up. But there was something inside Ethan that refused to be silenced. He knew what he had seen, knew it wasn't a figment of his imagination, and each new taunt only increased. His determination to uncover the truth, and it was precisely when he decided he couldn't depend on anyone that Ethan made the riskiest decision of his life, going back to the closet alone at night and facing head-on what everyone insisted on ignoring. That night, the city seemed to breathe more slowly. The lights of Atlanta twinkled in the distance, but in the East Point neighborhood, a calm reigned. broken only by a few dogs barking in the distance. Ethan lay in bed, but he knew he wouldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow hidden behind the closet, felt the cold metal on his hand, and remembered the mocking laughter echoing in the hallways. No one believed him. No one wanted to listen. Then he realized that if it weren't for him, the truth would never come out. He waited until his mother fell asleep, exhausted after another long shift. Silently, he grabbed the small flashlight he kept in his backpack, his cell phone, and his notebook. He walked slowly. Outside, careful not to creak the floorboards, and walked down the dark street to school. Each step seemed to carry the weight of an irreversible decision. Lincoln High School loomed imposingly in the darkness, its windows reflecting the moon like glass eyes. Ethan jumped over the side gate, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it could wake the entire neighborhood. He slipped through the shadows until he found an unlocked entrance, probably overlooked by the janitor. Inside, the school was plunged into an oppressive silence. Hallways that during the day were filled with voices now seemed like endless tunnels. The echo of his footsteps was so loud that he stopped every few moments, afraid someone was nearby. At every corner, he shone his flashlight, illuminating faded murals, closed doors, and dusty lockers. But his destination was clear: the West Corridor. As he approached, the air grew heavier, as if the atmosphere around the cabinet held a story that refused to be forgotten. Ethan took a deep breath and, with trembling hands, began pushing on the side of the frame where he had previously found the crack. This time, he applied more force. The metal creaked painfully, as if in protest, until a whole section moved, revealing a narrow opening. The boy shone his flashlight inside and swallowed hard. The space was larger than he had imagined. A narrow tunnel opened up, with makeshift walls of wood and concrete covered in dust and cobwebs. It was impossible to believe all of this had been hidden inside a school for so long. Without a second thought, Ethan entered, crawling through the space. Every movement stirred up dust particles that stuck in his throat, making him cough softly. His phone recorded everything, capturing every detail as proof that he wasn't crazy. With every step I took, I encountered disturbing signs. Scratch marks on the walls as if someone had tried to escape, torn papers with faded writing, and a rusty chain still attached to an iron hook. The silence was so thick that every breath seemed to echo like a scream. The boy knew he was entering dangerous territory, but the feeling that something bigger was hidden kept him going. At the end of one of the makeshift corridors, he found a broken wooden box, partially covered with old cloths. With effort, he brushed off the dust and realized that inside were old photographs. Some showed students he had never seen, others were partially burned. Most frighteningly, many of them had faces, scrawled with red marker. Ethan felt his stomach churn. This wasn't just a makeshift hiding place. It was a macabre memorial to something no one should ever have discovered. He backed away, trembling, but knew he had to keep going. His instincts told him what he'd found was just the beginning. And it was at the moment he believed he was alone, immersed in that tunnel of secrets, that Ethan realized something even more disturbing. It wasn't just the dust moving around him. There were signs that someone or something was still inside. The tunnel seemed to stretch on and on, like a hastily constructed makeshift maze, then forgotten by time. Ethan held the flashlight steady, but with each step, he felt the darkness closing in even more. The air was thick with mold and rust, and each breath felt like it was scratching his throat. As he turned one of the tight corners, he came upon a nearly rotten wooden door, reinforced with an iron bar. He pushed hard, and the wood creaked loudly, opening the door to a small, hidden space. What he found there made his body shiver. The place looked like a secret room, filled with stacked boxes and broken furniture. In the corner sat a rusty desk covered in yellowed papers, old notebooks, and sealed envelopes. Ethan approached and, with trembling hands, opened the first notebook. The pages were filled with handwritten notes describing student names, schedules, and secret meetings. There were also scribbled symbols like markers that might indicate locations within the school. More disturbing was finding a folder of newspaper clippings. The headlines spoke of student disappearances in the 1980s, unsolved cases that had been forgotten. The photos of the young people plastered across the pages were of innocent faces who never returned home. Ethan leafed through them wide-eyed, recognizing some names mentioned in stories that teachers never discussed in class. As he analyzed the clippings, something caught his attention even more. Some old photos had red ink markings, exactly like the scratched marks he'd seen on the faces in the burned photographs moments before. It seemed like a silent signature, a cruel line that linked all those disappearances. The boy recorded every detail with his cell phone, understanding that these images were more than mere evidence. They were fragments of a terrible secret someone had purposely buried there. With each new discovery, the feeling of being watched intensified. The flashlight illuminated the room, but the shadows around him seemed to move on their own, as if they were breathing along with him. Suddenly, a dull sound echoed through the tunnel, coming from somewhere farther away. A wooden creak, as if someone had stepped on a loose board. Ethan froze, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. His heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo off the walls. He turned off the flashlight for a few seconds, trying to hide in the darkness. The silence returned, but this time it was filled with menace. He knew he was no longer alone. There was someone or something in there, tracking his movements. The discovery of the boxes, the newspapers, and the photographs was not only a step toward the truth, it was also a warning that he was trespassing into forbidden territory, a place where secrets should not be revealed. Slowly, he relit the flashlight and took a few steps back, committing everything to memory and to his cell phone. That room was confirmation that his intuition had been right all along. The cabinet wasn't just a forgotten hunk of iron, but the entrance to a web of dark secrets the entire city had ignored for decades. But before he could escape with the evidence, Ethan would feel the price of going too far, because someone was already ready to silence him. The silence of the tunnel seemed heavier now, as if the air had become solid around Ethan. He held the flashlight tightly, illuminating the path ahead, but every shadow cast by the narrow walls took on a form of its own, as if alive. His steps were cautious, but there was no hiding the sound of the wood creaking under his weight. The creak he had heard minutes earlier was no illusion. Someone was there. Suddenly, a dim light reflected in the distance. Ethan switched off the flashlight, holding his breath. The glow came from a larger flashlight carried by steady hands. He backed against the wall, trying to hide, but it was too late. The approaching figure slowly revealed itself. It was the school janitor, Mr. Miller. His face, always marked by seriousness, now displayed a cold, almost animalistic expression. His eyes reflected not surprise, but rather suppressed anger, as if he had expected to find someone there. "So, you couldn't stay away, could you, boy?" The deep voice echoed through the tunnel, reverberating off the narrow walls. Ethan tried to respond, but his throat felt too dry to make a sound. Instinct told him to run, but his legs were paralyzed. Miller took a few steps forward, the flashlight beam shining directly into the boy's eyes. "You shouldn't have seen any of this," he continued, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "This place is not for the curious." The man advanced further, reaching out to snatch the phone from Ethan's hands. The boy reacted with unexpected speed, backing away and clutching the device to his chest. Miller tried to grab him, but Ethan narrowly dodged, running through the narrow tunnel. The chase was on. The sound of footsteps echoed, growing closer, mixed with the sound of the narrow walls being scraped by the fleeing boy's body. The beam of light behind him illuminated everything, revealing his position. Ethan's heart raced, his legs burned, but fear drove him to run without thinking. In one of the hallways, he tripped over an old box and fell to his knees. His cell phone nearly slipped from his hands, but he managed to catch it in time. When he looked up, he saw Miller a few feet away, breathing heavily, his gaze fixed like a predator about to capture its prey. Ethan, desperate, shone the flashlight directly in the man's face, blinding him for a few seconds, and then took the opportunity to run again. The tunnel seemed endless, but suddenly he found a makeshift ladder made of loose planks that led back to the surface. He climbed with all his might, while Miller advanced close behind, each step more violent. Ethan felt the man's hands almost reaching his feet, but with a final push, he managed to cross the opening and push a wooden lid that closed behind him. Panting, lying on the school floor, Ethan realized the danger wasn't over. The sound of the janitor's blows hitting the wood echoed beneath him, as if the walls were demanding he give up what he knew. At that moment, the boy understood that it was not just the mystery that was at stake, but his own life. And as he ran through the dark hallways of the school, still holding his cell phone, Ethan had no idea that his escape would be the trigger for something much bigger. A revelation that would expose the entire town to a secret impossible to ignore. Ethan ran through the school hallways as if the ground were on fire. His heart was pounding, and every closed door felt like an obstacle to his survival. He clutched his cell phone to his chest, as if it were his life. Behind him, Miller's heavy footsteps slowly faded, then disappeared completely. Silence reigned again, but Ethan knew that silence wasn't peace. It was a threat. Postponed. Without looking back, he managed to escape through the side exit and, panting, ran to the street. The Atlanta night seemed indifferent to the chaos he carried within. The streetlights illuminated his trembling figure as he searched for safety. It was then that he remembered the police officer who sometimes handled security near the school, Sergeant Angela Carter. Unlike the other adults, she was the only one who had ever treated Ethan with respect, listening to his words without mockery. Trembling, Ethan ran to the local police station. When he entered, all eyes were on him, but it was Angela he fixed on. With tears in his eyes, he held out his cell phone and with a broken voice said simply, "They need to see this. Now." Angela, realizing the gravity of the situation, took him to a private room. As Ethan showed him the videos she had recorded in the tunnel, the officer's expression changed every second. Images of rusty chains, boxes containing scratched photographs, notebooks with the names of missing students, everything was recorded. The silence in the room was broken only by the muffled sound of the recording. When it finished, Angela slowly stood up, looked at the boy and said, "Ethan, you have no idea what you just revealed." The next morning, the entire city was in shock. Newscasts opened with images of patrol cars surrounding Lincoln High School. Helicopters circled overhead as journalists jostled for space to broadcast the news in real time. Headlines splashed across screens and newspapers. Dark secrets revealed at Atlanta school. Hidden tunnel exposes disappearances from the 1980s. Desperate parents rushed to the scene, some in tears as they recognized faces in the photos displayed by the police. Archived stories, once only painful memories, now resurfaced with overwhelming force. Ethan watched from afar, sheltered inside a patrol car. He felt small compared to the scale of his discovery. He didn't want fame or applause, just that someone had believed in him before it all became so big. Angela stayed by his side, making sure he was safe. As the truth spread, a new tension arose. If the tunnel and the evidence came to light, someone would have to answer for it. The town demanded justice, but the question was who, besides caretaker Miller, was implicated in a long-kept secret. And it was exactly at that moment, when everyone thought the truth was already complete, that the night brought the most intense outcome. The Eye. Operation that would reveal how far that secret could go. The following night seemed to carry a different weight over Atlanta. The streets around Lincoln High School were blocked off by patrol cars, yellow tape, and armed police officers. The building, which for years had been nothing more than a backdrop for teenage routines, was now transformed into the stage for a movie-worthy operation. Helicopters streaked across the sky, projecting beams of light onto the roof, while hastily summoned FBI. Agents strategized alongside local police. Ethan watched from inside a support van, protected by Sergeant Angela Carter. His eyes reflected both fear and fascination. It was hard to believe that this mystery, ignored for so long, was now the focus of national attention. He was no longer just the hallucinating boy. He had become the key piece in a puzzle everyone wanted to solve. When the order was given, the agents advanced. Doors were smashed open with metal battering rams, and previously, silent corridors echoed with the sound of heavy boots. The objective was clear: locate every secret compartment, secure evidence, and capture whoever was involved. Ethan, with his cell phone, had provided more than enough evidence to prove the danger was real. As the teams swept through the school, tension intensified. In one of the tunnels, they found new boxes, sealed folders, and documents connecting the disappearances of young people to the institution's internal records. Most disturbing was the discovery of makeshift cameras made from scraps of old furniture and torn mattresses. The officer's silence upon discovering these scenes spoke volumes. There was no doubt that terrible crimes had been committed there. However, the operation wasn't over yet. Janitor Miller had been missing since the previous night. Many believed he'd run away, but Angela had another hunch. "He's close by. Men like that don't leave their hiding places easily," he muttered, scanning the hallways with his gun drawn. And she was right. One of the groups of agents found Miller trying to burn documents in a side room. The man fought back, trying to escape through the tunnel, but was intercepted by an armed team. The confrontation was brief and intense. The sound of shouts, hurried footsteps, and firm orders echoed through the hallways. Miller was finally captured, handcuffed in front of the cameras that already surrounded the school. The image of his arrest spread across the country within minutes. Outside, the crowd waited anxiously. When the news of the capture was confirmed, a chorus of voices erupted in applause and cries of relief. Parents wept, hugging each other. The past, previously suffocated by silence, began to be exposed to the light. Ethan, however, didn't fully share his euphoria. His body trembled, his eyes watered, and his soul heavy. He knew that behind the bars and seized documents lay much more than answers. There were scars that would never fade. Angela noticed his silence and placed a hand on his shoulder, saying, "You did what no one else had the courage to do. The city will carry this burden, but you freed it." As helicopters still illuminated the school and officers collected evidence, Ethan looked back at the imposing building that now looked like a crumbling shadow. The mystery had been revealed, but in his heart, something told him this story was far from over. And indeed, the next day, as the dust from the operation began to settle, a new chapter would emerge, not in the dark hallways of the school, but before the entire town, which would finally look at Ethan as never before. The sun rose timidly over Atlanta, as if the city itself was still processing the previous night. In newspapers, on radio stations, and on every television screen, the name Lincoln High School echoed. Headlines featured Miller's arrest, the discoveries in the tunnels, and the documents that would reopen long-held investigations. But among all the words, one was beginning to stand out: Ethan Johnson. The next morning, the school opened only for a special assembly. Officials, teachers, parents, and students gathered in the gymnasium. The bleachers were packed, and the mood was a mix of collective shame and a need for reparation. Angela Carter was there, in a position of honor, but it was Ethan who became the center of attention when he entered, accompanied by his mother. Silence was immediate. The same boy who had been the butt of jokes for months now walked before hundreds of eyes, watching him with respect and, in many cases, regret. His mother held his hand firmly, proud and moved. The school principal was the first to stand. His voice, previously authoritative and dry, now trembled slightly. "Ethan," he began, taking a deep breath, "on behalf of this institution, I want to apologize for not believing in you. You saw what we all refused to see." A chorus of applause rose up, but Ethan remained silent, staring at the floor. Teachers also approached, some visibly embarrassed. Classmates who had previously laughed now watched him with shame, unable to face his courage. Then they asked Ethan to speak. The boy stepped up to the microphone, small compared to the crowd, but with a strength that came not from his voice, but from the truth he carried. "I didn't want medals or applause," he said slowly. "I just wish someone had listened to me before." Those words fell like a weight on everyone present. They weren't a triumphant speech, but a reminder of the negligence that nearly cost him his life and allowed dark secrets to remain buried for decades. The entire gymnasium fell silent for a few moments until a new round of applause broke out, this time not of euphoria, but of genuine recognition. His mother hugged him tightly, and Angela Carter smiled discreetly, as if she knew that the boy still had a lot to face, but had already changed the destiny of an entire city. And that very night, when the gym lights were dimmed and the applause had faded, Ethan would return to his room, and there, in the silence, he would discover that the end of the story was only the beginning of something even more disturbing. That night, when silence once again fell over the small East Point apartment, Ethan retreated to his room as if returning from an invisible battlefield. The world outside spoke his name with excitement and amazement, headlines, news reports, tributes, but here, within the four-worn walls of a modest home, he was just a boy again, with doubts, confused memories, and the invisible weight of carrying secrets that not even adults dared admit. The notebook, his silent companion, was already on the wooden table, its cover torn and its pages marked by time and pain. Ethan opened it slowly, as if resuming an interrupted conversation. With hands still trembling, he began to write, not intending to organize the facts or compile a report, but simply to release everything that still burned silently. He wrote, without punctuation, without order, without filters, just fragments. The closet, the smell of earth, the names scratched out of the photos, Miller's pale face, the things he heard but didn't tell anyone, and that muffled whisper that seemed to come from inside the walls. The window was ajar, allowing the cool early morning breeze to filter through the worn curtains and dance across his skin. He looked out with a heavy gaze, far beyond his years. The city lights flickering in the distance seemed to beckon a relief, a promise of normalcy. For a few seconds, he even allowed himself to believe that it was all over, that the cycle had been justly closed, and that now he could finally rest. But then, amidst that nighttime landscape, his gaze was caught by a single lit window in a distant building. It was too high to be on a normal floor and too brightly lit to seem natural. A silhouette paced back and forth, slowly, almost rhythmically. And for a moment, Ethan had the distinct feeling that the person knew he was being watched. His heart raced, a chill ran down his spine. There was no way to prove it, but something inside him stirred again. Was it just imagination, an echo of recent trauma, or was it once again a sign? A new thread tugging at his attention, as if the universe were testing him once more. Ethan closed the notebook carefully, as if sealing a chapter. He took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on that distant window. His expression held something new, a mix of weariness and alertness, as if he knew, deep down he knew, that certain mysteries don't arise by chance. And that maybe he had never been just an ordinary boy, but rather a key player in something much bigger than he could ever imagine. Because when you are able to hear what no one else hears, see what no one else wants to see, and touch what everyone avoids, there is no way to go back to being invisible. As the camera of the viewer's imagination slowly pulls away out of the bedroom, through the window, and up toward the starry Atlanta sky, the only certainty that remains is this. Ethan didn't just change the course of a school. He opened a wound in time, and what spills out of it may yet shock the world. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and get ready. Because what comes next will be beyond anything you've ever heard.